Good morning, everybody. Today we're joined by Shipping Labs. We have Magnus, who you can see on the screen now, and later we'll be joined by Claus Graugaard from the Mercer McKinney Zero Carbon Shipping Centre, Lars Andersen from Alfa Laval, and Jakob Andersen from MASH. We're going to be talking about alternative fuels. First, I'm going to ask the director of the Shipping Labs, Magnus, to give us a little rundown on what Shipping Labs is and why we should be interested. Thank you, Magnus.
Well, thank you, Nick. Shipping Lab is a Danish strategic non-profit partnership for the maritime industry, where companies and universities work together on solving technical issues regarding especially the decreasement of the carbon footprint from shipping, but also aiding the development of optimization tools that could be within digital ship operations, or pushing the development of autonomy within shipping.
And Shipping Labs is like a conglomeration of companies, but you have MASH, which produces fuel. You have Alfa Laval, which is a technology company, and then there's the research center as well. But there are other companies, are there not?
Yes, you could say Shipping Lab it's a platform for collaboration in the Danish maritime industry. We are more or less for everybody, as long as they have some project ideas or just one in which they could collaborate with other parts of the maritime industry. So for example, we have manned energy solutions and Alfa Laval. We also have Maersk Tankers and Lauritsen, or they're called BV Epic Kosan right now. Also present, but that's in the large end. And then when we talk company-wise, we also we have smaller companies like Quasia Technologies, who also produce biofuels. We have Ballard Power Systems, who make fuel cells for ships, and we have a number of universities comprising the Danish Technical University, Aalborg University, University of Southern Denmark, and so on, and also the seafarer school called CIMAC. So yeah, we comprise more or less
a really broad church. Broad church. And do the companies fund this, or the Shipping Labs, or is it a government funding, or how does it work? Is it independent?
We are independent of political interests, and we are public-private partnership. So the answer to both would be yes, it's privately funded and it's publicly funded. We are funded by the Innovation Fund Denmark, which is a Danish national fund, and we are funded by three maritime funds. The Danish Maritime Fund is one of them, then Lauritsen Fund and Orients Fund also, and then roughly half of the investment in the projects are coming from the industry itself. So we are public and privately funded, yes.
Excellent. Okay, thank you very much, Magnus. I'd like to bring in Claus, Lars, Bo, and Jakob now, if that's okay with you.
Yeah, of course.
All right, we'll talk to you later, maybe.
Yeah, thank you.
Good morning, gentlemen. And my first question really is going to be to Claus, because you're already a center of technology. Why do you need Shipping Labs?
I think this is very good. Thank you, Nick, for asking that question. I think what we're doing at the center is absolutely essential, that we to the widest degree bring together stakeholders across the industry, and not only in Denmark, but across the entire ecosystem of the shipping sector. The Shipping Lab in Denmark is representing a number of essential stakeholders from primarily from the Danish shipping ecosystem. But I think together with the center, there will be a lot of possibilities to work from a mutual ambition of actually supporting the decarbonization journey of the sector with the innovations going on in the Danish sector, but connecting that with what's going on the global scale. And here I'm talking about how can we as a center with the wide outlook that we would like to take on the perspectives of the decarbonization transition, how can we then also help and guide what's going on in the shipping lag perspective in a more Danish perspective, and hereby hand in hand use some of the Danish innovation power to support also the global reach of what we're trying to achieve together.
Okay, that's great. And Jakob, MASH is a fuel producer, in my understanding. Correct me if I'm wrong. What do you see as the fuel of the future, given the future is going to be green? Hopefully.
Well, that's the $1 million question, isn't it? That I think a big part of what we're up to has to do with figuring out exactly how that cake should be cut, and what are the exact sort of let's say premises and validation points that are needed for different types of fuels to be onboarded in this industry. So a big part of what we're up to when we sit down together is to figure out what is the variation of fuels, and which of these seem viable on a shorter term, medium term, and on a longer term, both from a financial, technical, but of course also a sustainability perspective. So that really is where it all starts in the work that I do together with these people here, these very competent people, and of course, I have coming from a company that produces fuels of various types. I'm of course somewhat biased in my opinion on that. So actually, to be completely honest, in this context, I try to put that on the table and say, well, of course, we are doing certain things within biofuels from pyrolysis and other things, but also certainly see that things such as ammonia on the longer term, hydrogen maybe, but also on the medium term, things like methanol and other fuels will be very, very interesting to look at. Of course, also maybe even on the shorter term, let's say GHG reduced or greenhouse gas reduced fuels such as LNG, various liquefied fuels will also be very interesting. So it's a big question, and I would say I'm not trying to be deliberately ambiguous about it, but really what we're trying to figure out is what does that actually look like? What does that rollout look like? And how do we make sure that those fuels are onboarded as we get the clarity on which fuels to use?
Okay, so MASH is a fuel producer, but you have which fuel do you normally produce then? What's your standard?
So if I allow myself to put the MASH hat on for a second, well, what we do is we have a near-term focus on what you could call, like I think in the industry you would widely call them biofuels, so fuels produced from various agricultural residues, things like that. Then we have a medium to long-term focus on hydrogen-based fuels. So those could be both in the form of synthesized methanol, but also hydrogen in its pure form and ammonia. We have a technology platform that actually allows us to feed into all of those fuels in a very meaningful way. So that's actually how we look at it. But on the near term, we're very much looking at biofuels, which is a difficult one to deal with, which is really also why we have this focus on standardizing things.
Okay, excellent, thank you. And Lasbo, what do Alfa Laval bring to the team? I mean, I know you're a technology company, but you don't produce fuels and you don't produce ships. So what's your role? Oh, you're muted, Lasbo.
Sorry about that. Alfa Laval is of course a global technology provider, and what we bring to the table here is of course our capability of development technology. And in that context, if you look at Shipping Lab as a platform for where we can contribute, then of course the Shipping Lab will actually allow us to connect with various partners. So even though Alfa Laval is a broad company and has a lot of different technologies, then we don't cover everything, and that's of course a good opportunity for us for meeting other people, other companies that have other competences besides the ones that we have. So we are I'm heading a test center here in Alfa Laval Aalborg, where we had approximately 2,800 square meters of test equipment surrounding a 4-stroke MAN 2 megawatt engine. So that allows us to do a lot of various tests and development together with partners, and that's also why MAS and us has connected to the Shipping Lab project. And we can see that the future is not crystal clear, even though a lot of people believe it is. But we can see for the maritime, there will be a lot of different things that needs to be tested in the future to find out what are the road to decarbonization in this industry. And here we cannot provide a test with the test facilities we have here. And of course, we are also interested in developing ourselves, learning from all these partners that we can bring in. So that's what we hope to achieve with that. That's of course learning, but also to provide a way of decarbonizing the industry. So.
Okay. My understanding is that the three big areas of shipping, the bulk carriers, tankers, and container shipping, and especially container shipping, use the large majority of ship fuel. And I guess the understanding that I have as a layperson is that actually, if you're going to decarbonize shipping, you need to focus on these deep sea areas, and that isn't going to be fuel cells or electricity. It's going to be some form of biofuel or alternative fuel. Is that your understanding, Claus?
Yes and no, I would say. I think it all starts somewhere, and I think when it comes to some of the very you can say more immature technologies like fuel cells, and this will start in a smaller context, probably in maybe more coastal near shipping, but we definitely also see that there are technologies out there when it comes to power generation on the ships. For instance, we can exemplify the solid oxide fuel cell technology with high temperature solid oxide processes, and this could potentially hold a great potential to increase the efficiency of power generation on board the ships. This also actually connects very well with what we're looking at when we're talking synthetic fuels generation, where the solid oxide electrolysis process is likewise aided by a maturity on solid oxide processing. So if the potential of these could be actually uptaken for both synthetic fuel production and for power generation on board the ships, there might be a potential of maybe more than 15% in efficiency increase over the next 20 years or so. So if this helps, this will of course significantly reduce the need for an amount of megajoules provided to the world fleet, which again correlates into the need for how much renewable power would be needed to produce the sufficient amount of renewable or synthetic fuels for the shipping sector alone. So I think there are potentials that we will definitely see evolving over the next 10, 20, and 30 years as we go along.
The 15% isn't actually going to be enough. 15% over 20 years, is it? We need to get to 30% by 2030. So
yeah, but that's for sure, Nick. But here I'm talking about gains in efficiency in lower heating values of the actual power generation, that you could actually see that the increase of this will you will also have to, of course, supply it with fuels that have sufficient low emission, either zero or low emission, absolutely. But if the amount or the volumes of fuel that you actually need to convey to the entire sector, then that will all in all that will support the transition possibilities.
Okay, and for MASH, Jakob, is ammonia a critical fuel? Is it something that you think that can be used in container shipping?
Well, I think I think a lot of these fuels, what you really are discussing is, how big a headache are you going to get when you actually try to take it on board and try to make use of it and get energy out of it. So there's the sort of the low-hanging fruits, which would be a fuel that is just a drop-in fuel that works with whatever infrastructure is already there. Of course, it would be super enticing and very, very interesting if we could come up with some kind of a fuel formulation that could service the entire deep sea market. because then you wouldn't have to replace infrastructure. Then there's sort of the next level of complexity, the methanols of the world, where, okay, we have some low flash points. Will this explode when we take it on board? Do we have to have other fuel handling systems? But we're still within internal combustion systems. Then we go sort of more exotic into something like ammonia, which is a massive headache to combust in a cylinder. So what do you do with that? So do you see what I mean? Like, I think there is an escalation there that needs to be taken. And at some point, there might also be a choice of, do we actually need to get rid of the internal combustion infrastructure and replace it with something that has to do with, more electrochemical approaches? So ammonia is a nice setup, because in the terminology that is quite common these days, we talk about well to tank and tank to wake. Well, on the tank to wake, it is a zero emission fuel. You still have the NOx that's emitted from it, but that, along with hydrogen, is very, very enticing on the tank to wake side. So yes, that's a good solution, but technically, in terms of combusting the stuff, it's not the lowest hanging fruit. Let me say it like that. But I don't think that anyone in the industry has any delusions otherwise.
Sure. And last, but using ammonia, I think it takes twice as much room as a tank space, if you like, to produce the same amount of energy. So how do Alfa Laval get around that problem for existing ships and maybe even future ships if ammonia proves to be one of the fuels of the future?
Well, what we are, of course, looking at, that's, of course, everybody talks power to X these days. We talk X to power. And for sure, ammonia is one of the most interesting fuels that we see in the future, even though it takes up much more space than the oil we have today. But nevertheless, you can have a zero carbon emission from the ammonia. And I agree fully with Jakob here that it is difficult to combust. The combustion velocity of ammonia is like a tenth of oil or even lower. So it will be difficult to take and use one-to-one in a engine as we know it today. It will be even more difficult to combust it in a boiler, which of course we are looking a lot at. I think it also have some issues regarding safety. There was also, if you have a ammonia leak, of course you will have certain death of people in the near of the ammonia, and so that's of course something that needs to be taken very seriously. And we are addressing all these issues right now and investigating. We are also looking into ammonia, not for the combustion engine, but instead for fuel cells, and has a project together with actually Zero Carbon Center, where we are looking at that. And ammonia is, of course, the long-term goal as we see it. We believe there will be other stepping stones towards this, and one of them will be methanol that we are also investigating right now, which will be something coming in the near future. And in the short term, of course, we are looking into biofuel as a viable solution, either as a drop-in or also as a B100 that you can use instead of oil. Alfa Laval wants to support all these scenarios, no matter which one is coming out at the end. We see in the long run that most likely ammonia will be the preferred fuel. But it will take a long time before we can get it in every harbor around the world, for sure. So,
and my understanding is, I'll throw this out to all three of you. My understanding is that ammonia creates a corrosion in the cylinder of the engine. Is there a solution to that problem?
Yeah, I think that's correct, Nick. There's definitely some issues, and when it comes to ammonia, this is probably the most the product where we see the most immature or lowest TRL levels of technology readiness, both on the bunkering side, the logistics sides, and on the onboard vessel sides. However, having said that, I'm also quite sure that as an industry together, these are problems that if they are addressed correctly from a risk management and technology development point of view, that this can be solved, both when it comes to, for instance, corrosion areas. There's also an issue on the emission control, like the N2O slip from burning ammonia that would need to be carefully addressed we have the big discussion presently on what is actually the slip from methane from burning LNG. This will again for ammonia. I think you need to be aware that you can control such discussion areas from the beginning in a sensible way and address it up front in your technology development.
Basically, what? Sorry.
Yeah, sorry, I was muted. I just to add a note to Claus's comments, I would say one of the very interesting things about ammonia, and if you contrast that to what the shipping sector has looked like thus far, well, today you have certain standards that govern what you get to put onto your vessel. So that would be something like the ISO 8217 standard for bunker fuels. And within that, you find a very large spread of different types of fuels that even within the same substandard will exhibit different properties and different behaviors. Well, if you have ammonia, well, the good thing about ammonia is ammonia. So if you've made it work once and you found a viable solution for combusting ammonia and having a system that works for that, you don't have to worry about whether it'll work the next time, because if it's still ammonia that you're putting on board, it'll act the same way. Whereas if you're dealing with, let's say, something like a biofuel, which is something we spend a lot of time on in Mash Energy, well, biofuels are as different as you would see from conventional bunker fuels, maybe even more so. So you'll see issues occurring that you've never seen before. So it's not in any way a given that a vessel that works with one biofuel and an infrastructure that works with one biofuel is going to work with the next one over, right? So of course there are some higher barriers that you need to cross, but things such as ammonia and hydrogen obviously are really, really enticing, because we're dealing with very, very simple commodities as opposed to what we're dealing with today.
Right. But my understanding is, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, again, as a layperson, my understanding is that ammonia has these problems of producing a corrosion in the cylinder, has a toxicity. LNG has methane slip, and the well-to-wake for bio-LNG, the well-to-wake markings, if you like, the statistics for it is not great. Hydrogen, I think, also when you burn it, produces NOx. Every fuel at the moment has a problem, doesn't it, that we have to overcome. So, which one's the least problem? Which one, in your opinion, looks the most likely?
Yeah, that's a great question, Nick, and I think from where we are, if I should just take where we are at the Maersk Mc-Kinney Møller Center for Zero Carbon Shipping at the moment, we are addressing various pathways, and we are trying to dig deep into each of the pathways that we see has a potential for reducing the emissions and the greenhouse gas potential of the various energy carriers, and I fully support what you're saying, that there are various challenges and various potentials in the different solutions, and at the moment we don't see that this is going to be a one size fits all, and there's going to be only one product that will rule the entire industry, depending on trade patterns and you can say trade flexibilities. There will be various solutions that might fit one ship type and one trade pattern better than another. And what we would like to do in the center, and what we are doing, is taking an approach where we address where do we see that there are various gaps in terms of technology immaturity, or where are the regulatory immaturities, or where are the political barriers or financial barriers, or maybe business case barriers that we, by addressing these together with the great partners that we are now joining on board in the center here, we address these issues in projects and mutual collaboration to see, okay, can this be solved in a reasonable way, so that we can actually pave the way for whatever product we're talking about, so that it represents a valid solution for the future.
Okay. And Lasbo, is there technology that Alfa Laval is developing that can help us with all of these fuels or some of these fuels?
Well, we are looking into a lot of different technologies these days, and you could say that if we stay on the oil path, then of course we are doing a lot towards emission control. So we are looking into both filtering on particles, using a scrubber, using combined technologies for handling the emission coming out of oil combustion. So that I think we are looking into, and that will for sure assist at least the particle problems that you see today, solving these. Then of course there is the CO2 issue with burning the oil, and that is of course not being addressed by removing the emissions from the particles. But that's how it is. So there you probably need some CO2 capturing or something like that. We don't see that on board vessels as is today. To be honest, we think it is much better to do on shore, using a coal plant or something else that are producing emissions or exhaust gas with a high CO2 content that we don't see on board a vessel. If we talk other solutions, methanol as an idea, then we think that actually we can utilize methanol quite good on board a vessel without major design changes. There will be some challenges for sure, but we believe these are quite possible to solve. Of course.
What are the main challenges for methanol?
Yeah, the energy density of methanol is of course not as high as what we are used to. We also have this low flammability point that actually requires some extra measures towards safety. But I think most of these are known from handling LNG on board the vessels, so I don't see this as a big issue actually. I think these are solvable. Also, methanol, of course, is not direct ignited by combustion, so you need to redesign the engine somehow to be able to run on that. But that I think is also doable, and I think a lot of the motor manufacturers, they have been addressed this issue and are coming up with solution on that. Taking it into a boiler, we believe is quite easy and can be done. There will, of course, be need for redesigning how we see the fuel system for the boilers and things like that, but that is, again, something that is doable and then not that problematic. So methanol for sure will be one of these things that will come shortly. Ammonia, we as Claus also mentioned, we see this as somewhat more challenging than the other fuels, at least from what we see. So.
Okay. I think Claus wants to jump in here, so I'll go to let him.
Yes, thank you very much, Lars. Great to hear some practical hands-on on how you see that. I think overall, what we can see and what will be instrumental in our work is definitely that we need to approach these various energy carriers from a life cycle analytical perspective. We need to get into a closer grab on the life cycle impact analysis on the various energy carriers, and that goes all the way from well to tank to propeller, and in the past, and also how IMO has treated the combustion of fuels on board the world fleet, we have only looked at it from a tank to wake perspective, and this needs to change now. We need to have the full perspective about how the fuel's produced, what is actually the environmental impact in that part of the supply chain, and how is the impact when we look at it from a tank to wake perspective. So establishing industry recognized methodologies for life cycle impact analysis and having a mutual view on how carbon intensity is actually accounted for will be instrumental in order for all of us to have a more clear picture about how we evaluate and you can say justify how the various energy carriers are implemented in the fleet. And this is something that we would like to spend some time on in the center together with our partners, and also together hopefully with industry body regulating bodies like IMO and others, to try and see how can we actually find methodologies and approaches here that makes good sense and find commonality understandings about how we address this issue.
That's really interesting. I come actually full circle in my thinking. I'm sitting here thinking about methanol, ammonia, LNG, these are hydrogen. These are all the fuels that have been talked about now for a good couple of years as being possible alternatives and will be in the mix. Is there, Jakob, a fuel that we haven't thought about that is sort of coming from left field, bringing up the rear in the horse race technology termination? Is there something that we can foresee coming?
Well, that's the thing, and I'm very happy that you asked that question, because actually I think it will have been January of this year, we got a grant for Shipping Lab to actually explore that type of question from the Danish Maritime Fund.
Okay.
And the whole point is to figure out the hypothesis, and I think it's actually a pretty well-founded hypothesis, is that we have an industry here that has a certain focus on different types of fuels and there's a good reason for that. But there's actually an undergrowth or a large number of candidate fuels that are not even being considered for use in industry, in part because those fuels are looking at other industries. They never really considered going into the maritime industry or into shipping. Secondly, because they are actually, they don't know what it takes to actually succeed in this industry. And a lot of this stuff is also on a research basis. But again, as we've just established, a lot of this stuff is at a pretty low TRL in any case. So we are actually now trying to build a platform. We call it the Green Fuel Validation Platform, which has the purpose of standardizing the process by which a new fuel is sort of onboarded in this industry, and trying to make it clear what it actually takes to succeed in the industry. What does it take in terms of technical viability, in terms of sustainability measures like Claus was just talking about? How do we quantify these, and how do you fit in? So we're actually putting in a lot of work these days to try to figure that out. And yes, there are fuels. I can mention some of them within the area of thermochemical processes, but in his intro, Magnus also mentioned a really exciting Danish company that is in a similar field as my own, called Quassia Technologies, which does really cool stuff within biofuels. So yes, there's a lot of them out there, and I think that we can get to actually highlight some of these in the coming time.
And interesting that you mentioned biofuels. I was speaking recently to Dirk Kronemeyer from Good Fuels in the Netherlands, and he suggested that actually biofuels cannot produce enough for land-based and aviation and marine requirements. In which case, government should decide that the land-based fuels land-based biofuels should be omitted. They should all go to aviation and marine, because those industries are harder to decarbonize. What's your view on that?
So you're asking me, well, so I have to say that I actually disagree with that. I think that as an industry, biofuel means one thing these days, and pretty much one thing only, maybe two things. It means fatty, FAME type products, so Eucomi and FAME in general, and it means HVO. And those are derived from very, very specific supply chains. And the whole point is that there are many waste supply chains of biomass that are not even being looked into, or at least where there's not enough focus on the types of products that could come out of these. So Eucomi, which is a big one, right? Like that is being traded. Well, yes, we're running out of it because there's only so much used cooking oil in the world, right?
Yeah.
So I'm familiar with some of the companies that you mentioned. Well, also the strategy there, is it based on a more wide view of what is available out there in terms of the sustainably harvestable bioresource, or is it focusing, when you say biofuel, is it focusing on those specific instantiations within that? And I fear that it's the latter.
Okay. Do you have something to say about that, Claus?
Yes, no, I think definitely that I'm not sure exactly which should be prioritized before other industries, but definitely I think a part of the overreaching work that organizations like ourselves are doing is definitely to try and see where do we have the various sectors competing for the same products, because we fully acknowledge that scalability and then sourcing of whatever product you would like to aim for will become an issue, at least in the near and midterm. So it is necessary to look at that competition between the sectors from the beginning and see, are there obvious choices for some sectors. That means it will be harder to get the products for instance, for shipping. Then we need to take that into consideration about what are the priorities before we start accelerating the infrastructure development, because that will be, of course, be a key enabler in order to the whole transition to succeed. So that's where I see probably one of the hardest choices will be, how do we start gaining momentum on the right infrastructural choices so we don't lag behind in actually serving the bunker facilities around the world for whatever energy carriers an operator choose to opt for.
Okay, and I guess the next question is, my view is that there are two elements to the decarbonisation of shipping. There's the near-term element up to 2030, which is kind of like a transitional period, and then there's the longer term up to 2050. Lars Bo, is it possible for the technology that we have now to get us to the 2030 target, that nearer target, in your opinion?
No, that's a good question again. I would say, yeah, I believe actually we can meet the 2030 target by the technologies that we have today. We might need some adaptation towards the target, but I think it will be possible. What we have learned from LNG, for instance, when this was introduced as a fuel some years ago, was actually that in the beginning it was really scarce in the ports. It was not available widespread, but it took 3 to 5 years. Then all of a sudden you could more or less bunker in every harbor around the world. I think we will probably see the same when it becomes economic attractive for other fuels to become available. Of course, still it provided. Of course, we still need them to have them available, the fuels. So that might be the other problems. That also was mentioned by both Claus and Jakob, that we are in a fierce competition with other industries that would also like to decarbonize, and that's of course how we see it, and what will probably happen. That it will probably go to the marine or to aviation. At least that's what we are seeing right now. And but if the fuel is available, I'm quite sure it will also be available in the ports over the years. And that means also we have the opportunity to decarbonize the industry and meet the 2030 target with the technology that we have today. So but it will come. Yeah.
Thank you. You mentioned the economically attractive issue. It's there in the background. It's the elephant in the room for all technology, and I've noticed that various people have called for market-based measures. They're called, aren't they, from the IMO? How key are these to the development of new fuels, to the development of technology? Who wants to take that question?
Yeah, I can maybe try and answer that. That's absolutely correct, Nick. Absolutely, the carbon levies or CO2 tax is something that certainly is an interesting instrument, and I fully believe that how hard you actually turn that or pull that handle will definitely influence significantly the appetite to see a transition happening. And another aspect we haven't discussed so much today is the energy efficiency of our fleet. As definitely, if you look at the existing fleet today, there is a huge potential. If you look at the most optimized energy efficient vessels in the world fleet today to the worst performing vessels, there is a significant difference in the megajoules that you need to actually deliver to the propeller in order to move the ton miles across the sea. So here is a huge potential, and of course carbon tax is also a driver to actually get the investment appetite, looking at when is the return on investment period actually getting shorter, so that we could see more appetite for owners and operators, both on the existing fleet to actually start adopting the most obvious solutions, and not least for new vessels being built, that we see both through an increase and heavy enforced EEDI, you could say increased expectation that new vessels are as energy efficient as possible. This holds a big potential.
Jakob, you're nodding vigorously there.
Yeah. No, I think it's such an interesting thing, because I also think that if you contrast shipping from to something like just onshore transportation, for a while now in the EU across the board, you've had the Renewable Energy Directive, which is now, I think this summer will be updated to a second iteration, and there will be more iterations there. Any fuel that fits under that category, you essentially have a 100% premium on top of the base price of that fuel within that. So you can also see whenever those products, and those are the Yukomis of the world and all the other products that otherwise would have been sold in that industry, when they're being traded in shipping, obviously they're being sold at the same prices, but there's no incentive there. And then it comes down to what do you do there? Is it via carbon tax? Can you do something via EEDIs and other things, and do some carbon factors on fuels? What I can see is in a place like the Netherlands, they had I think it was in principle meant to be an onshore scheme for fuel accounting within the GHG emissions that has actually been utilized by many shipping companies. The only problem is that the whole reason why these have been instated is because of the Dutch government wanting to meet certain targets, and they saw this as a reasonable return on investment, and it absolutely is, I believe. The problem is that because of international shipping and the jurisdictions that are involved, they simply cannot claim all the credits that have been utilized at sea. So really what we're dealing with is, of course, you need to have these standards in place, but we can take a lot of lessons from what's been done in other, let's say, onshore industries. That's one thing. The other thing is really the recurring topic of international law and the jurisdictions at sea. How do you actually govern these things? That's where I see a really, really tough nut to crack.
That's an interesting aspect, isn't it? Because land-based industries essentially are in a jurisdiction, and they're confined to that jurisdiction. But shipping is global, as you say. It's an international industry, and that's, I think, my understanding of why people say we need international regulation. Yeah. But in a sense, there's a question mark over the IMO and its ability to provide that. Does it need a push from guys like you who can say we can produce the technology, but we need the backup from IMO. We need the backup from local from regional jurisdictions in order to produce. I mean, my understanding, and I don't want to go on too long because people don't want to hear me, but my understanding is that if you're going to have any kind of parity between new fuels and the existing fossil-based fuels, you're going to have to add around about $300 a ton to the cost of fuel. That to me doesn't sound very likely, given the situation with the IMO. Is that necessary in order for new fuels to be developed? Is that the kind of level we need to think about?
I think it's that's of course a good question. To what level do you need to have the CO2 tax being the main driving force in enforcing the transition? Just to answer the first part of the question regarding global regulation, I think shipping should be in a very unique position compared to other sectors, since we actually have an internationally ruling organization with the IMO, and we should do everything it takes amongst the regions also to support and support the acceleration of that IMO can follow pace, and that we can actually set the standards ideally through the IMO as an internationally ruled regulation on how we actually enforce the transition. This is super important. Having said that, I also think that it is probably necessary that various regions start pushing the agenda to put some pressure on the IMO. So for instance, if EU should decide to go ahead with ETS carbon systems, then yes, that might be fine, just to get us started and see that it can be done, and to what kind of levels, what kind of influence does that actually have. The level of the carbon tax, you have to look at the various in our strategy work for the transition strategy. We look at this as swing factors, and one of our swing factors is obviously the carbon tax as an instrument, but there's also other swing factors like the technology uptake. There is the customer pull. How can you actually create? When do you start to see the customers actually requesting that green transportation of their goods will actually influence necessarily on how much extra premium are you willing to pay? The regulation is also a swing factor. And for instance, now we are seeing the EEXI coming in. We have the AER, and we have the carbon intensity index. These kind of mechanisms all are swing factors that will actually support the journey. And if you add them all up and you play that, you can say the amount of handles that we can pull, then we can force the transition overall, I think, in a sensible way. And of course, the more aggressively you want to see that the outphasing of carbon in the emission of ships should happen, the harder you will have to pull those handles. So the more aggressively and the shorter horizon you'd like to see carbon coming out of the equation, then yes, then carbon tax will have to be higher. But of course, again, we have to also remember that we are still competing against other industries, and you don't want to see a modal shift where goods is actually transported on land because shipping is doing something that you can say rules them out of the transport game.
That kind of leads me on to another question, really, because the IMO has so many different interests involved. It has, oil producing countries, it has gas producing countries, it has various vested interests. How do you bring those together, and can the EU do that? Can the EU ETS do that, or do we need another mechanism there in order to push the IMO in the right direction, if you like?
Yeah, it's as I said, I think we definitely need to try and secure that IMO plays the vital role in the transition as a global regulator for shipping, because otherwise it becomes very, very difficult for the individual operators to navigate again across various jurisdictions. And you can say it also creates a screwed competitive picture depending on which trade areas you actually going in and out of. Again, I think regional legislation and this can be enablers to actually push some innovation in how you look at and using regulation and taxes as an instrument. But overall, I would like to see that it's the IMO setting the scene to bring the whole sector in the right direction rather sooner than later. And one thing here is, I would like to come back to that, is how can IMO as soon as possible look at carbon intensity and these life cycle impact analysis as a mutual view on methodology and approach to this? And how do you actually define issues like net zero? How is that defined? Because today, if you ask 5 different actors, they will answer that question differently. And this is one of the leads into what we're doing on this validation platform. Is exactly there's unclarity around some of these issues, and this is why it's strong that through the shipping lab in this case here, we are bringing together actors on a mutual ambition to actually try and shed some clarity on an issue about how can, for instance, bioproducts be brought into the market and looked at from a viable perspective, both from a technical maturity level, but also from a commercial maturity and readiness level. And this is exactly the objective of what we're trying to do with partners on this platform to try and build a validation platform together that could lead the way into that this product is actually ready to go on board a ship, and it's also certified as such.
Excellent. I'm conscious of the time, so and I'm also conscious that Lars Bo hasn't had a say here. So I'd like to ask you to sum up, Lars Bo. What are your final thoughts on these issues and how the technology can help, etc.?
Well, I think that of course in the past IMO has been quite good in doing some legislation. We have seen it on the ballast water. We have seen it on the sulfur content. Of course, it took a long time for everybody to agree, and I believe that is probably the issue we will see also here. If we want to have a CO2 tax, then it will take a long time before everybody agrees on that. So you are quite right that we need a push from somebody, and preferably also a pull from our customers. And I'm quite sure that when IKEA they ask for zero carbon transportation from A to B, then of course suppliers or ship owners will go in and agree on that and find out how this can be handled. But we need both the push and the pull in order to have a success here. That's for sure. Alfa Laval, of course, are really happy about legislation. It drives a lot of business when you have legislation, and it drives it also towards zero carbon. That's at least what we have seen until now. Legislation, of course, needs somehow to be made and to be made so it makes sense both for the owners and also for the suppliers into the system here. That I think will take a long time before we are ready with that. So we need to push and put pressure on the IMO to do the legislation fast. And that, of course, by demonstrating, for instance, the shipping lab platform that we are having here, we can actually exemplify that we can do something. And we are, I think, in the Danish maritime industry is actually quite unique because we have a lot of various players supporting each other here. And that, of course, something we can demonstrate for others that actually you can do something if you work together. So I think that's what we will see from the shipping lab and what we already see now. Now we have 3 entities here that are working quite close together actually in the Danish maritime industry, and that's something that can bring us along the way for sure. So put some pressure on. It's difficult to do, but of course, if we stand together, then it might be possible. So.
Okay, thank you very much, Lars. But Jakob, from your point of view, what are we looking at for fuels in the near future?
Earlier, you put up a figure of when would it be feasible for the industry to take on, let's call them GHG reduced or sustainable fuels, and I think you said $300. Well, if you look today, I haven't checked today literally, but I did check a couple of days back. If you look at what Eucomi is being traded at, I believe that we are looking at something like $1,400 per ton, and that is a fuel that, if you disregard all the sort of the environmental credentials or sustainability credentials, is equivalent to something like a DMA, which would normally these days trade for, let's say, $530 per ton. So there's a massive gap there. And why is that gap there? Well, in part because regulation on onshore sets the price. But also, why is it then increasing this much? Well, supply and demand. So I don't like another argument to be looked at, and another thing to be looked at, and something that we're very much trying to address with this green fuel validation platform that we're creating, is that there is simply a lack of supply. Demand is certainly there, or at least it's building up, or you could say that demand is not there because the price point is incorrect or is out of tune with what the industry is willing to pay. But certainly it doesn't help that you have a lack of supply. So we're looking at bio-oils, as we determined earlier, as something that is a scarce resource. But we also have determined that there seems to be a lot of candidates that could be utilized that are not currently being utilized. So in that light, there should be an effect of that, in that the basic leverage for suppliers should change if there's more supply out there, right? So what we're really trying to do is to build on the supply, try to get more candidates in, give the ship owners more options, and that of course should in turn, without any regulation, should also help in driving down prices somewhat and increase the adoption of fuels that are sustainable.
Thank you, Jakob. And Claus, is it going to be easier for the IMO now that we have the Americans back on board? Is that going to make a big difference?
Absolutely. I think this is, of course, we are very, very satisfied to see how the Biden administration came out the last week here and actually set some really ambitious targets. And it was, of course, also very interesting to see how shipping was actually playing quite a role in how they played out. And it's quite ambitious to go for an absolute zero objective in 2050. So it only puts even more ambition and pressure on this. And I think when it comes to also this, the customer pull I was mentioning before as one of the swing factors that could actually enable the transition, and the willingness to pay for the gaps that Jakob correctly is alluding to, that there are huge gaps to the green products. But if the customer is saying to say, this is what we want, then the actual cost of the end consumer is very, very little. We might be talking about anything between 0.5 to 3% on the end user of the product, no matter what has been transported. So if you can actually convey that cost to close the gap to the end user cleverly, then we will start to see that it is actually possible, but we need to find commercial mechanisms in parallel that actually encourages this transition.
Excellent. So we've heard the fuels are becoming available. The technology is already there. We need the political will, and we can get there, basically. So I'd like to thank Claus Graugaard from the Maersk Mc-Kinney Møller Center from Zero Carbon Shipping. That's a big mouthful.
Yes,
Lars
thank
Andersen
you.
from Alfa Laval and Jakob Andersen from MASH. It's been a pleasure talking to you. And I'd also like to thank Magnus Gary from the Shipping Labs. Thank you very much and goodbye.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you.